Have you ever felt completely drained right after a close conversation? They never said anything harsh, yet when you walked away, your energy felt depleted. That exhaustion comes with a quiet inner whisper. Is this really genuine care? It is a persistent contradiction. Your rational mind tries to trust the surface-level kindness, while your intuition is already sounding an alarm. It might be a compliment subtly laced with comparison, a form of help that leaves you feeling indebted rather than supported, or a fleeting sense of satisfaction they seem to feel when you experience a setback. Carl Jung, the great psychologist who illuminated the depths of the human mind, observed that when a person holds unresolved emotions, such as envy, resentment, or deep insecurity, they may try to conceal them, but their body language and emotional energy never lie. This silent opposition inevitably finds a way to surface through small, subtle gestures, just enough to make you repeatedly question yourself. Am I being too sensitive? Wow. That is the moment your perception is pointing you toward the truth. In this video, I will share with you 8 practical and unmistakable signs that can help you recognize whether someone close to you may be quietly creating opposition toward you. No matter how kind they appear on the surface, we are not here to accuse or fuel hostility toward anyone. Instead, these signs are meant to help you confirm that your sense of unease is grounded in reality and that you have every right to trust your own sensitivity. Pay special attention to sign number 8, because it reveals how you may be unconsciously suppressing your true emotions just to keep the peace. Understanding this is the most important step toward protecting your inner sense of calm. Sign 1. Disguised sarcasm, when laughter carries a sharp edge. Carl Jung once wrote, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." There are forms of harm that do not arise from open conflict. They require no arguments, no insults, no raised voices. They arrive more quietly, wrapped in a light tone, hidden inside a remark that seems harmless, and then disappear immediately after the surrounding laughter fades. You are not attacked directly. You are not criticized to your face, yet something inside you has been touched at exactly the wrong spot, and you know you cannot simply ignore it. Like a longtime friend, meeting you again after a while, smiling warmly and saying, "You've been living pretty simply lately, huh? Guess you don't have as much ambition as before." Or, "Wow, you're really confident in yourself," daring to wear something like that out. On the surface, these comments sound friendly, even tinged with concern. But if you pay closer attention, they often target precisely the things you are trying so hard to protect: the path you have chosen, the rhythm of life you are building, the quiet efforts you have never felt the need to show off. This is no longer humor. It is doubt, neatly packaged in a smile. From the outside, nothing seems particularly wrong. No one openly insults you. No one voices a direct criticism. Even if someone were to ask you what made you uncomfortable, you might struggle to point to where the problem actually is. But your body knows. That silence does not come out of nowhere. It comes after a joke that sounds playful, yet strikes precisely at the place you are struggling to overcome in your life. It might be your appearance, when you have only just begun learning how to accept your body. It might be your career, when you are still trying to find your footing. It might be your way of living, after it took you a very long time to gather the courage to walk a path different from the crowd. And it is exactly there that the joke appears. Not blatant enough for you to react, but precise enough for you to realize. The speaker knows very well which wound they are touching. This is the most dangerous aspect of disguised sarcasm. It does not hurt you immediately. It does not provoke anger. It makes you doubt yourself. You begin to ask, am I being too sensitive? Am I overthinking this? Were they really just joking? And while you are busy questioning yourself, the sharp edge has already done its job. It pierces the right spot, then withdraws, leaving behind a dull ache that is hard to name. Such remarks are often delivered in an intimate, familiar tone. "You've gotten really confident lately. That's pretty brave, quitting a stable job to do that." Not many people go for that style these days. Taken individually, there is nothing obviously wrong. The speaker might even insist they are complimenting you. But if you listen carefully, these comments always share one thing in common: They make you feel off-center, out of step with the norm. Somehow, too much. And that difference is placed on display as a form of shared amusement. If you react at all, your reaction is usually subtle. A fleeting frown, a forced smile, a short reply, just to move on. And immediately, the other person has their defense ready. Oh, come on, I was just joking. You're too sensitive. Can't you take a joke? With a single sentence, all responsibility is pushed back onto you. From the one who was just wounded, you become the one who is difficult, humorless, killing the mood. And so you fall silent. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you understand that if you speak up, you will be the one disrupting the atmosphere. In close relationships, this is especially dangerous. Familiarity makes it easier to overlook. You do not want to make a big deal out of things with family members, longtime friends, colleagues, or people you have known for years. You choose to laugh it off, to let it pass, telling yourself it is not worth dwelling on. But your body does not forget. Each time it happens, you shrink a little, you share less, you become more guarded, and gradually, you are no longer fully yourself in those conversations. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." In many cases, these seemingly harmless sarcastic remarks do not come from humor at all, but from avoidance. When someone is unwilling to look directly at their own insecurity, envy, or dissatisfaction, they will look for ways to push those feelings outward. And one of the safest ways to do that, while still preserving an image of being kind and fun, is through laughter. In Jungian psychology, this is a form of projection, the projection of the shadow. The shadow does not only contain what is dark or destructive, it also holds suppressed desires, unlived dreams, and fears we refuse to acknowledge. When they see you trying to live more authentically, daring to be different, or moving closer to a version of yourself they once wanted to become, their shadow is activated. But instead of facing it, they choose to make you smaller, with a joke. They do not need to say, "I don't like that." They only need to make you feel slightly awkward, slightly out of place, slightly wrong, and that is enough. I once heard a very ordinary, very human story. A single mother, juggling work and raising her child, constantly exhausted from lack of sleep. At a rare gathering with friends, she arrived without having time to put on makeup. A close friend tilted her head and laughed. "Oh? Going for the wild natural look today?" The whole group burst out laughing. She laughed too. But from that moment on, she withdrew from the conversation. No one noticed. No one apologized. Yet inside her, a very clear message had been delivered. You look unkempt, unattractive, and that is something to joke about. Moments like these are not big enough to provoke open resistance, but they are persistent enough to wear you down. The more you hear them, the more you begin to believe that perhaps you are not good enough. You stop talking about what you are trying to build. You avoid sharing your joys. You restrain your confidence, afraid it will once again become a target of mockery. And what is striking is that all of this unfolds amid laughter. There is no obvious villain, no publicly acknowledged victim, only you, quietly making yourself smaller. So, what should you do when you realize you are in situations like this? First of all, not to retaliate, not to confront aggressively, and not to blame yourself. The first step is to observe not the other person, but your own response. After each joke, how do you feel? Lighter or heavier? More connected or more distant? That feeling matters, because it is the most honest signal you have. Next, look at repetition. A single remark can be accidental, but if these jokes consistently revolve around the same point, the same aspect of who you are, the same effort you are quietly making, then it is no longer random. It is a pattern, and patterns always carry meaning. Once you are clear, you may choose how to respond if you wish. There is no need to be harsh, no need for lengthy explanations. A very simple, calm sentence can be enough. "I know you're joking, but honestly, that comment made me uncomfortable." What matters is not your words, but the response that follows. Someone who respects you will pause, listen, and adjust. Someone who is governed by their shadow will keep joking, keep dismissing, and keep blaming you for being too sensitive. At that point, you gain a very clear piece of information to decide where this relationship belongs in your emotional life. Not to condemn anyone, but to protect yourself. Finally, there is one important thing that needs to be said. You are not obligated to laugh when you are hurting inside. Staying silent, to keep the peace, is not always noble. Sometimes, it is simply a way of abandoning yourself to maintain comfort for others. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you cannot become who you truly are if you constantly distort your feelings to fit someone else's laughter." If you recognize yourself in these words, then perhaps you have already begun doing something very important. You are learning to trust your own feelings. Not to distrust everyone around you, but to stop remaining in relationships where closeness is built on your silence. Seeing this does not make you bitter. It simply makes you more mature, more aware, and a little closer to your true self. And sometimes, that alone is enough to begin changing how you show up in the world. Sign 2. Subtle sabotage. The forgetful moments that always come at the right time. After you have grown accustomed to sarcastic remarks wrapped in laughter, you may begin to notice something even more unsettling. Not everyone needs words to hurt you. Some people choose silence. Not complete silence, but a very faint, very proper kind of presence. One that consistently leaves you feeling let down at the most critical moments. On the surface, everything seems reasonable. No one raises their voice. No one confronts you. There is nothing obvious enough to label as bad. Yet, strangely, every time you are about to take another step forward, about to make progress, about to live a little better, about to need just a bit of support to complete something important, that is precisely when a small incident occurs. A promise is forgotten. A piece of information is not repeated, a detail is left out. And once again, you are left to handle everything on your own, as if that were only natural. Subtle sabotage does not appear in the form of open opposition. It does not say, "I don't want to help you." It does not say, "I don't support you." It simply fails to show up at the right time. It remembers incorrectly. It runs late. It forgets. It assumes that you probably already handled it yourself. If these things happen once, you may let them go. Twice, you may empathize. But when they repeat themselves within the same period, especially when you are on the verge of improving your life, when you are pushing forward and in need of support, you should begin to trust your intuition. When you start to feel that something is off, that is precisely the moment your body has recognized the danger before your rational mind has had time to analyze it. To validate that intuition, ask yourself this: when these unintentional incidents occur, do you notice that the actions of the person you trusted never truly harm them? The mistakes are always vague, unclear, and deniable, yet the consequences always fall on you. Let me give you a few examples to show just how deeply hidden subtle sabotage can be. It may come from a close friend, someone who always says they believe in you, that they are proud of you. But whenever you need an introduction, a connecting call, a small confirmation to step through a new door, they are suddenly busy, or they promise to send something and then forget, or they say they will remind you later, but later never comes. It may be a colleague who smiles at you every day, asks about your personal life, yet repeatedly gives you inaccurate information, misstates meeting times, or accidentally leaves you out of important conversations. None of them do anything serious enough to be held accountable. But all of these things, taken together, little by little, slow you down, leave you short of breath, or cause you to miss opportunities you might otherwise have seized. What makes this kind of sabotage dangerous is not its intensity, but its rhythm. It does not destroy you all at once. It exhausts you. It erodes your confidence over time. Each time it happens, you ask yourself, am I expecting too much? Did I not explain clearly enough? Am I bothering people? Gradually, You begin to lower your own expectations. You hesitate to ask for help. You stop sharing your bigger plans. You do everything yourself, not because you enjoy independence, but because you no longer trust that support will arrive when you need it. Carl Jung once wrote, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate." There are people who are not aware of their own feelings of inferiority, envy, or insecurity. They do not dare admit that your progress makes them uncomfortable. They are not honest enough with themselves to name their fear of being left behind, and so those emotions do not disappear. They find ways to express themselves not through words, but through actions, through repeated forgetfulness, through delays that seem harmless, through small mistakes that always occur at crucial moments. For them, your slowing down, failing, or missing opportunities unconsciously becomes a way to rebalance an inner world that feels unstable. You may still see them congratulating you on social media. You may still see them show up at important events, clapping, smiling, saying all the right things. But their real interference does not lie in those visible moments. It happens behind the scenes, where no one is watching, where everything can easily be explained away as an oversight, and because of that, you are often the only one who experiences the full chain of events. Outsiders may say you are overthinking, that no one would sabotage in such a roundabout way, but you know, because you are the one who is always left cleaning up the consequences. Someone once shared with me their story from the workplace. Two people started at the same time, with similar abilities and ambitions. They shared a great deal with each other, both big plans and personal worries. When one of them was assigned to lead an important project, the other appeared very supportive. But from that point on, essential documents were frequently sent late. Tasks related to the other person's team were always completed last. When questioned, the responses were always, "Sorry, I've been really busy lately," or "I thought the deadline was next week." At first, the storyteller did not suspect anything. They blamed themselves for poor management, but after several months, those delays began to affect the overall evaluation of their performance. Opportunities for promotion gradually slipped away. And then, during a restructuring, it was that very colleague who was chosen for the position they had once aimed for. No conflict. No arguments. Just a sequence of coincidences arranged a little too perfectly. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever prepared carefully for a turning point, only to be missing one crucial piece because someone forgot to support you? Have you ever been advised to wait longer, to slow down, to play it safe right when you were ready to try something new? Have you ever noticed that every time you are about to move forward, there is always an external factor forcing you to stop, and that factor often involves the same person? These things are not big enough to be called betrayal, but they are enough to make you doubt yourself and the path you are on. The important thing to remember is this: not all forgetfulness is malicious. But when forgetfulness becomes a pattern, when it repeats itself in the same context, at the same moments, and consistently leaves you feeling let down, you are no longer dealing with chance. You are facing an unconscious drive that has not been acknowledged. In such cases, what is needed is not confrontation, nor harsh questioning. Confrontation often only makes the other person more defensive, and you once again become the difficult one. Instead, begin with observation. Look at the frequency. How many times has this happened? Look at the timing. Does it always occur when you need support the most? And most importantly, look at how you feel afterward. Do you feel smaller, more hesitant to share, less excited than before? Your emotions are data. They do not lie if you are brave enough to listen. Once the pattern is clear, the next step is not to cut ties immediately, but to adjust your expectations. Do not place important plans in the hands of someone who has left you struggling at the last minute before. Do not rely on support from someone who always shows up too late. Learn to clearly distinguish between surface-level kindness and reliability in action. Some people are very pleasant, very polite, but not suitable companions on paths that require commitment and timeliness. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Every relationship creates a reaction. But if, after each interaction, you feel weaker, more doubtful of yourself, and more strained trying to maintain balance, then that reaction is harming you. And at that point, stepping back is not failure. It is self-protection. You do not need to expose anyone. You do not need to prove that they were wrong. Sometimes, maturity simply means recognizing that not everyone wants or is able to walk with you to where you are headed. And when you stop giving them influence over your most important steps, you will notice something very clearly. Your path feels lighter, not because you are walking alone, but because you have stopped letting other people's forgetfulness dictate the rhythm of your life. Sign 3. Silent competition. When your joy makes someone uncomfortable. There is a very small moment, yet if you have ever experienced it, you will never mistake it. It is when you share good news with someone you believe is close to you. You are not showing off. You are not exaggerating. You are simply sharing, as a natural habit between people who have walked together through many stages of life. But instead of the familiar excitement, instead of a follow-up question or eyes lighting up, you receive a very different reaction. It might be a quick nod. It might be a curt response. It might be a subtle change of topic, so smooth that if you were not paying attention, you would think you imagined it. But you did not imagine it, because in that very moment, your joy was just made smaller. Silent competition never begins with confrontation. It does not say, "I don't like your success." It does not say, "I want to be better than you." It appears through very ordinary reactions. You share that you have just completed a difficult project, and the other person nods and says, "Yeah, a lot of people can do that these days." You talk about reaching an important personal milestone, and they smile, then immediately tell a story about another achievement. Bigger, more impressive, and strangely timed to appear at just that moment. You excitedly talk about a new experience, and they quickly point out that they did the same thing a long time ago, as if casually placing your joy in a secondary position. No one openly denies you, but no one allows you to feel fully happy either. What makes silent competition so unsettling is that you cannot point to it with logic. There are no words sharp enough to be called insulting, no behavior clear enough to label as malicious, yet the feeling inside you is very real. After each instance, you begin to hesitate before sharing. You wonder whether you should say anything at all. Gradually, you start holding back the things that once made you excited, not because you fear ridicule, but because you are tired of your joy becoming an excuse for comparison. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Those who live within silent competition are often not fully conscious of what they are doing. They do not sit down and decide to make you uncomfortable. What operates beneath the surface is an inner struggle they themselves do not want to face. When they see you moving forward, they do not see only your success. They see the unfinished parts of their own lives, the choices they never dared to pursue, the dreams they quietly set aside. And instead of facing that sense of lack, they choose the easier path, pulling you back to their level, at least for a moment. Silent competition, therefore, does not need to win. It only needs to dim your light. It only needs to make you speak less, share less, feel less confident. And it is usually done with great subtlety. No one publicly dismisses your effort. They simply add another story. No one says your success is meaningless. They merely place it next to another achievement, as if by coincidence. But unconsciously, their sense of self-worth is being recalibrated. If you shine too brightly, they feel diminished. And for many people, that feeling is unbearable. There is a particularly hard to detect form of silent competition when it comes from those who were once very close to you. People who shared early struggles with you. People who started from the same place as you. In relationships like these, every step you take forward is not just a personal achievement. It is a reminder that two paths are beginning to diverge. And not everyone is ready to accept that. Instead of voicing their anxiety, instead of admitting they feel left behind, they choose to stay beside you, but with a different posture. The posture of someone who constantly needs to prove they are not losing, even when you never place them in a race. You may notice this through very small details. The way they listen to you changes. Their gaze no longer lingers when you talk about something you are proud of. Their responses become shorter, or they immediately redirect the conversation. Sometimes, you even feel guilty for being happy, as if your joy were an unnecessary display, as if living better than before were somehow wrong. And in that moment, you begin to shrink not because you have become more humble, but because you are trying to keep the peace in a relationship that has lost its sense of safety. Carl Jung once said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." The shadow does not consist only of obvious darkness. It also contains envy, comparison, and insecurity, things people do not want to admit belong to them. When the shadow is not acknowledged, it will find ways to express itself outwardly. In silent competition, that expression takes the form of not allowing others to shine without attaching a comparison, not because they hate you, but because they cannot bear the feeling of standing still. Someone once told me they realized a friendship was no longer healthy, not because of arguments, but because they no longer felt able to be naturally happy around the other person. Every piece of good news had to be measured before being shared. Every success had to be softened, reduced, or delayed. Eventually, they understood that the relationship did not make them stronger. It simply forced them to constantly adjust themselves so as not to make someone else uncomfortable. That was no longer connection. That was suppression. Have you ever been in that situation? Have you ever felt the need to hold back your joy just to avoid triggering a silent comparison? Have you ever found yourself speaking less, not because you had nothing to share, but because you no longer trusted that your happiness would be welcomed? If so, you are not weak. You are simply highly attuned to signals others overlook. And that sensitivity is not a burden. It is a form of awareness. So what should you do when you realize you are in a relationship shaped by silent competition? First, try stopping the sharing of what matters most to you and observe, not as punishment, but to see what happens when you no longer provide material for comparison. If they do not ask, do not show curiosity, do not feel the absence, then perhaps the relationship was no longer built on genuine care. It existed only as long as an invisible race could be maintained. Next, be honest with yourself. Not every close relationship is a safe place for you to shine. Some people enter your life to walk with you for a while. Others stay longer, but not to uplift you. They remain to remind you not to cross some invisible boundary. And when you realize this, stepping back is not failure. It is a conscious choice. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You are not obligated to make yourself smaller so that someone else can feel more comfortable. If someone cannot be happy when you succeed, that says nothing about your worth. It speaks only to the struggle they are avoiding. Sometimes, to preserve peace, you may need to stop sharing. But in the long run, you must choose carefully who truly walks alongside you and who merely stands nearby to compare. Joy is not something meant to be hidden. It is not something you need permission to feel. If a relationship makes you feel guilty for being happy, then perhaps it is no longer a place where you should entrust the most genuine parts of yourself. And when you dare to step away from silent competition, you will realize this. Happiness, when no longer measured against others, is already whole. Sign 4. Performative kindness, when presence carries no emotion. And then, after spending some time in relationships shaped by silent competition, you begin to notice something else. Not everyone who feels uncomfortable with your success will compete openly. Some people seem to have given up on that comparison altogether. They no longer list their achievements. They no longer try to outdo you. They no longer interrupt your stories. Instead, they become very kind. They congratulate you at the right moments. They say all the proper things. They do not mock you. Do not compete. Do not deny your efforts. From the outside, the relationship may even look more pleasant than before. Less friction, less tension, less conflict. And yet, this is precisely when you begin to feel that something is not quite right. Not because they do anything wrong, but because each time you take another step forward, their support stops at just enough to avoid criticism. There is no extra question, no added curiosity, no emotional step closer, as if they have accepted that you are moving upward on the condition that they do not have to follow. Silent competition, when it no longer works, can sometimes transform into a more refined form of hostility, removing emotion from kindness. No attacks, no resistance, just presence, without connection. Being there, but not with you, and within this very subtle shift, you begin to encounter something even harder to name than envy itself. Kindness, without genuine feeling. Performative kindness rarely hurts immediately. It does not stab like sarcasm or sabotage. It seeps in, slowly, very slowly. At first, you may blame yourself. Maybe I am just too sensitive. They are still behaving nicely. But over time, you begin to notice a pattern. This person stays with you only at the minimum level required to maintain appearances. They never take one step closer, never grow more curious, never ask a follow-up when you pause mid-sentence, never stay when your emotions begin to surface. This kind of kindness is often carefully disguised. It takes the form of politeness, social etiquette, the norms we are taught to follow. But unlike genuine kindness, it carries no warmth. You can share something deeply important to you and receive a response that is perfectly correct in wording, yet missing the one thing that makes you want to continue. There is no light in the eyes, no resonance, no sense that the other person is truly there with you. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. The deepest loneliness is not being alone, but being with others while unable to share what matters most to you." Performative kindness creates exactly this kind of loneliness. It makes you feel surrounded, yet unseen, as if you are speaking, but no one is truly listening. One very common form of performative kindness is emotionally empty presence. This person shows up to celebrate your success, shakes your hand, gives a light hug, takes photos, offers congratulations. Everything is done correctly, but afterward, they disappear. No follow-up question, no return visit, no curiosity about the journey behind your achievement. As if the role of supporter has been completed, and there is no need to stay. You cannot fault them, because they did everything right, and yet, that is exactly why you cannot grow closer to them. Performative kindness also tends to appear precisely when you need emotion the most. When you are struggling, they send a brief message, "Hang in there." When you are sad, they say, "Everything will be okay." These statements are not wrong. These statements, but they close the conversation instead of opening it. They end your feelings with a period, not a question mark. You are not asked further. You are not invited to continue. You are not held. And over time, you learn to stop speaking. What makes performative kindness dangerous is that it causes you to doubt yourself. You begin to wonder, am I asking for too much? Am I being overly sensitive? Yet the feeling remains. A dull sense of disappointment, an emptiness after each interaction. And if you are honest with yourself, you will see that you are never truly supported in that relationship. You are simply treated correctly. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." When kindness is used as a tool to maintain safety, to avoid emotional involvement, it is no longer love or care. It becomes a form of soft power. The other person keeps control by never stepping fully into connection. They remain just close enough to avoid blame, but never close enough for you to feel safe. Some people are performatively kind not because they are bad, but because they are not ready to face their own emotions. They may carry disappointment, envy, or a sense of inferiority they do not want to acknowledge. When they see you living more authentically, more emotionally, more fully, it unsettles them. Instead of attacking, they withdraw. They wear kindness like armor, so no one can accuse them of being unkind, while they maintain a safe distance from your light. You can recognize this through the way they show up. They are present when enough is required, but absent when real is needed. They appear when things are light, but vanish when the conversation touches pain, dreams, or vulnerability. They do not ask how you feel, only whether things are done. They care about outcomes, not the process. Have you ever experienced this? When you share something deeply personal, and the response is perfectly reasonable, yet makes you feel as though you have shared too much. When you need presence but receive only politeness? When you find yourself comforting yourself, even though others are around? Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Many people cannot truly be present with others because they cannot yet be present with themselves. Performative kindness, in this sense, is their way of avoiding the discomfort within. They do not hate you, but they also do not have the courage to walk with you into deeper emotional layers. So what should you do when you realize you are in a relationship like this? First, stop making excuses for others. Do not force yourself to feel grateful simply because someone did nothing wrong. Your feelings are important data. If after each interaction you feel drained, withdrawn, or as though you had to perform, that is a signal. Not to condemn anyone, but to adjust distance. Next, observe presence. Who stays when you are not okay? Who asks follow-up questions when you hesitate? Who does not require you to appear strong to continue the conversation? Genuine kindness does not need to be perfect. It can be awkward, but it always carries emotional presence. You can feel that the other person is with you, not merely standing nearby. Carl Jung once wrote, "The soul needs your willingness, not your judgment." You do not need to judge those who offer performative kindness. You do not need to expose them. What you need is honesty with yourself. Some relationships are not bad, but they are not deep enough. And you have the right not to place your most vulnerable parts there. Finally, remember this: indifference disguised as politeness is still indifference. It is not your fault if you need more than that. Someone's inability to be emotionally present does not diminish your worth. It may simply mean that you are living more authentically than they are, and they do not know how to stand beside you. Remember, you do not need to shrink yourself to keep the peace. You do not need to lower your emotional truth so others feel comfortable. You deserve relationships where kindness carries emotion, where presence holds warmth, and where you do not have to wonder whether you are asking for too much. Because in truly meaningful relationships, simply being yourself is already enough. Sign 5. Control disguised as care, when advice makes you doubt yourself. And then, after performative kindness, where emotion has been withdrawn but politeness remains intact, you may step into a form of relationship that is even harder to recognize. Not cold, not distant, but too close, too many questions, too much advice, too much presence in every small decision you make. This person does not stand outside your life. They step straight into it, very naturally, very reasonably, with a familiar opening line. "I'm just worried about you." At first, it makes you feel cared for. Someone is thinking about you. Someone is willing to give advice. Someone sees risks you may not have noticed, and you listen, you consider, you adjust. But then something strange begins to happen. After each piece of advice, you do not feel clearer. You feel blurrier, not steadier, but more hesitant. You start to ask yourself, am I being too reckless? Am I not mature enough? Am I misjudging my own abilities? That doubt does not come from failure. It comes from advice. Control disguised as care rarely wears an aggressive face. It does not command. It does not force. It arrives in a gentle tone, through statements that sound reasonable, responsible, even loving. "You should think more carefully. I'm just afraid you'll suffer. That market isn't easy. I think you're more suited for a safer path." Each sentence may be true, from a certain angle, but when they appear too often, always pointing in the same direction, they stop being guidance. They become a mold. Carl Jung once wrote, "The unconscious does not produce illness. It produces symptoms. The unconscious does not harm directly. It creates signs." In a relationship shaped by subtle control, the clearest symptom is not conflict, but inner contraction. You begin to see yourself through another person's eyes. You start weighing your choices not based on what you truly want, but on one question: what will they think? And when a relationship makes you ask that question too often, it is no longer healthy care. There is something very subtle about this kind of control. The person exerting it often does not feel they are doing anything wrong. They may even believe they are sacrificing for you. But if you observe closely, you will notice a repeating pattern. Their advice rarely opens multiple possibilities. It usually guides you toward what is safe, stable, low risk. In other words, what makes them feel secure. And when you choose differently, they do not oppose you openly. They simply become more worried, more disappointed, or withdraw their support. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Many people cannot tolerate uncertainty within themselves, so they try to control the world around them. When they do not dare to take risks, they fear seeing others step forward. When they have not lived the life they wanted, they unconsciously interfere in the lives of others. Control, in this case, does not come from malice, but from deep fear. You can see this clearly in close relationships. A family member who constantly advises you not to change too much. A friend who keeps reminding you to think about the family. An older colleague who warns you, don't stand out too much. It's not good. No one forbids you. No one says you are wrong. But these small remarks, when added together, form an invisible wall. You still move forward, but more slowly. You still think, but you no longer fully trust yourself. I once met someone like this in a creative environment. Whenever she had a new idea, someone very close to her was always the first to give feedback, always detailed, always well-intentioned. Yet strangely, after each discussion, her ideas became safer, flatter, more like what already existed. She was never forced to abandon her ideas. She gave them up herself, because she began to believe she was not good enough yet. It took her a long time to realize that the other person had never truly believed in her creativity, because they had long ago abandoned their own. Carl Jung once said, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." Growth does not move along a straight line of right and wrong. It passes through experimentation, mistakes, and risk. When someone tries to eliminate all risk from your life, they are not protecting you. They are taking away an essential part of maturation. Have you ever been in a relationship like this? When you make a decision and the other person's first response is not curiosity, but warning? When you share a desire and they immediately point out why it is difficult, unrealistic, or not suitable yet? When you begin to feel as though you need permission to trust your own intuition? What makes control disguised as care dangerous is that it attacks confidence. It does not make you rebel. It makes you more compliant. And that compliance is rewarded with approval, with the feeling of conditional love. Gradually, you learn to adjust yourself so as not to worry the other person. And at some point, you can no longer tell what you truly want, apart from what they expect. Carl Jung once wrote, "Individuation is the process of becoming the person one truly is. Individuation, returning to the self, requires accepting difference, even opposition. A healthy relationship may disagree with you, but it will not make you lose faith in your capacity to decide for yourself. Genuine care does not suppress intuition. It helps you hear it more clearly." So what should you do when you realize you are in a relationship like this? First, pay attention to how you feel after each piece of advice. Do you feel clearer, or more confused, stronger, or smaller? Emotional aftermath is a very accurate indicator. There is no need to accuse anyone. Just be honest with your own experience. Next, try to reclaim your right to decide, not by rebelling, but by explaining less. You do not need to convince others that your choice is right. You only need to know that it is yours. When you stop justifying yourself, controlling relationships reveal themselves, because the other person begins to feel uneasy when they can no longer intervene. Carl Jung once said, "Freedom is the condition for growth." If a relationship makes you feel safe only when you do not change, then it is not a space for growth. You do not need to cut it off. But you do need to set boundaries. Not boundaries enforced with harsh words, but boundaries formed through silence, through choosing to take responsibility for your own life. Finally, remember this. Genuine care does not make you doubt yourself. It may make you reflect, but it does not make you shrink. If over time you feel that you are living a more proper life but a less vibrant one, then it is time to pause and ask a very important question. Am I being loved, or am I being shaped to fit someone else's fears? You are not obligated to live a comfortable life for anyone else. Growth is not always safe, but it always requires trust in yourself. And any relationship that forces you to trade that away, no matter how caring it appears, deserves to be reconsidered with clarity and self-respect. Sign 6. Talking behind your back. When kindness exists only face-to-face, there are stories that, when they reach you, you do not need anyone to point out who started them. You only need to hear a retelling. One small detail. A familiar choice of words, so distinctive it cannot be mistaken. And in that very moment, you know exactly who has been talking about you. Not because you are suspicious, but because that is how they have always spoken to you, when it was just the two of you. The story itself is not entirely false. It is only tilted slightly. One of your emotions is trimmed down. One context is missing its beginning. A private confession is placed into a different frame. Not enough to make you angry, not enough to provoke an argument, but enough for you to realize that what you once said in trust is no longer resting safely where it belonged. What keeps you silent is not the content of the story, but the familiarity of the tone, the way that person explains you to others, the way they appear understanding, sympathetic, even protective, while being the very one who set the story in motion. You are not present, but your image is, in a carefully edited form. And strangely, when you meet them again, they still smile, still ask after you, still behave as if nothing has happened. Talking behind someone's back rarely begins with open hostility. It begins with closeness, with private conversations, with the belief that there is someone close enough to hear you speak honestly. And precisely because of that closeness, what they say, when you are not there, carries weight. There is no need to raise their voice. No need to fabricate outright lies. A vague remark, a doubt planted at the right moment, a personal detail shared under the guise of concern, that is enough. What makes this behavior dangerous does not lie in the specific content of the words, but in the position of the speaker. They are not a stranger. They are someone who still smiles at you, still checks in, still appears to understand you. In front of you, they maintain kindness. Behind you, they retain the power to shape your image in the eyes of others. And because you are not there, you cannot explain, cannot adjust, cannot protect yourself. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." For many people, facing their true emotions is far more difficult than talking about someone else. When they feel envy, insecurity, or threatened by your presence, they rarely acknowledge it. Instead, they seek a safer outlet, shifting the focus onto you, turning you into an object of discussion and judgment, and in doing so, easing the discomfort within themselves. Talking behind your back is often wrapped in very subtle disguises. It is not, "She's terrible, but I'm just worried about her." Not, "He's fake, but I've heard he's not as simple as people think." These statements are not meant to attack directly. They plant doubt. And once doubt is planted, the listener fills in the rest with their own imagination. There is a particularly dangerous form of this behavior, retelling things you shared in moments of vulnerability, but changing the context. A fear becomes weakness. A moment of hesitation becomes incompetence. A complaint becomes a personality trait. And because this information comes from someone close, it is more readily believed than any explanation you might offer later. I once heard a story like this. A woman working in a highly competitive environment, always trying to maintain harmony, had a colleague she was very close to, someone who knew exactly how much pressure she was under. In a moment of exhaustion, she confided that she felt overwhelmed and afraid she could not keep up. A few weeks later, she noticed that her supervisor began assigning her fewer important tasks. People around her looked at her with pity. Only later did she learn that her comment about pressure had been retold as evidence that she couldn't handle stress. The person who retold it continued to treat her kindly, but doors had quietly closed. Carl Jung once said, "The projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." When someone does not recognize their own fear, weakness, or ambition, they see it in others. And when they speak about you to others, they are not only speaking about you, they are speaking about themselves through a distorted mirror. Tragically, you are the one who bears the consequences of that distortion. Talking behind your back does not only damage reputation, it shatters a sense of safety. You become more cautious with your words. You think more carefully before sharing. You begin to wonder, will this be retold? Will this be misunderstood? Gradually, you withdraw, not because you do not want connection, but because you no longer trust that connection is safe. You can recognize this sign through very small details. A private piece of information about you appears in a place where you never shared it. Someone suddenly asks you about something that only one person knew. A remark about you spreads without a clear source, yet its tone feels strangely familiar. And most unsettling of all, the person behind it all continues to appear innocent in front of you. Carl Jung once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. But this does not mean you must accept being harmed. Recognizing another person's shadow does not require you to allow them to damage you. Understanding unconscious mechanisms simply helps you stop blaming yourself. Stop believing that the problem lies in being too trusting." When facing this form of hidden hostility, many people's instinct is to clarify, to confront, to prove the truth. But often, that only makes things more complicated. Those who talk behind your back rarely admit it. They deny, minimize, or redirect the story. And you are once again placed in the position of being too sensitive, defensive, or making a big deal out of nothing. Instead, what is most needed is observation. Observe whether the behavior repeats. Observe which information about you is no longer safe. Observe who changes their attitude toward you after private conversations. Observation is not about distrusting everyone, but about knowing clearly where boundaries are necessary. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Becoming yourself sometimes means accepting that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Some relationships should remain at the level of social courtesy. Some stories should be shared only with those who have proven their trustworthiness through actions, not words. If you are going through this, remember, what others say behind your back does not define who you are. It only reveals their limits. You do not need to explain yourself to everyone. Consistency in action and character will speak for you over time. Those who are clear-minded will recognize truth from noise. Finally, allow yourself to step back from relationships where kindness exists only when you are present. There is no need for drama, no need for announcements. Simply adjust the distance quietly. You do not owe anyone access to your inner life. Trust is something that is built, not assumed. And if there is one lesson here, it is this: value those who speak honestly to your face, even when it is hard to hear, more than those who always smile, yet speak about you when you turn away. Because in the world of mature relationships, genuine kindness does not fear the light. It does not require two faces. And you deserve connections where words spoken behind your back are no different from those spoken in front of you. Sign 7. Not happy about your success. There is a very small, very ordinary moment, yet it is enough to make you pause. You have just completed something important. It might be a project that took months, an exam that once kept you awake at night, or simply a brave decision you never dared to make before. You are not showing off. You are just sharing, the way people usually do with those they trust. And the reaction you receive is not wrong, but it is not right either. A slow nod. A soft, "Yeah, that's good," spoken quietly. A silence that lingers a little longer than usual, long enough for you to start filling it with unnecessary explanations. And that is the moment when your happiness becomes someone else's discomfort. You begin to wonder if you are being too sensitive, if you are expecting too much, if they are tired, busy, or simply not good at expressing emotions. You come up with every possible reason to protect the relationship, because admitting the truth is far harder, that your joy, for some reason, was not welcomed. What hurts most here is not that they say something negative, it is that they say nothing at all. No excitement, no curiosity, no desire to know more, no questions, no depth, no willingness to stay with you in a moment you had to travel very far to reach. You start to pull your joy back, as a reflex of self-protection. You speak less, you share less, and gradually, you grow used to keeping the good things to yourself. Not everyone knows how to be happy for others, especially when another person's success unintentionally becomes a mirror reflecting what they themselves have not achieved. Carl Jung once wrote, "The reason for evil in the world is that people are not able to tell their stories. When someone has not been able to live out their own story, they can easily feel unsettled by the unfolding story of another. And instead of acknowledging feelings of inferiority, loss, or envy, they choose a less painful path, making your success seem insignificant." This mechanism works very quietly. No one stands in front of you and says, "I'm not happy to see you succeed." It appears in subtler forms. You share that you were promoted. They respond, "Well, that position must be pretty stressful." You mention that your writing was well received. They say, "These days, anything can get shared." You talk about a new relationship that makes you feel safe. They smile lightly and say, "Hope this one's different." Each sentence makes sense on its own. But together, they form an unspoken message. Don't be too happy. According to Jung, this is a reaction of the shadow, the unconscious part, that carries emotions people do not want to acknowledge in themselves. When the shadow is triggered by someone else's success, it seeks to diminish the value of that person in order to protect a fragile sense of self-worth. Not because they hate you, but because your joy forces them to face a question they are not ready to answer. What about me? I once witnessed a relationship like this in a workplace. Two close friends, starting out almost the same. When one began to move ahead, receiving bigger projects, being mentioned more often in meetings, the other did not object or attack. He simply grew quiet each time good news came up. No follow-up questions, no real congratulations, no engagement, and slowly, the more successful one began to feel guilty whenever work was mentioned. Pride was suppressed. Excitement was deflated. Not out of fear of being disliked, but out of fear of making the other uncomfortable. Have you ever been in that situation? When you hesitate for a long time before sharing something good, unsure whether the other person truly wants to hear it. When you feel the need to shrink your success, adding phrases like, "just luck," "probably timing," or "it's nothing special," so no one feels left behind. When you realize that in this relationship, you are allowed to be sad together, but not allowed to be happier than the other person. There is a hard but important truth. Not every close relationship is safe for your joy. Some people can sit with you in the dark, but cannot bear it when you step into the light. And that says nothing about your worth. It only reflects their emotional limits. Carl Jung emphasized that psychological maturity requires the courage to face one's own unpleasant emotions, rather than denying them or projecting them outward. When someone cannot do this, they unconsciously weaken the joy of others, just to keep their inner world from being disturbed too much. So what should you do when you recognize this? First, trust your feelings. If you consistently feel disappointed, empty, or forced to suppress your joy after sharing with someone, that is not imagination. Emotions do not arise out of nothing. They are signals, and those signals deserve to be heard. Next, try adjusting how much you share. Not to punish anyone, but to protect yourself. Observe what happens when you stop telling them everything. Do you feel lighter? More like yourself? If the answer is yes, you have gained an important clue about the quality of that relationship. Finally, ask yourself a very direct question. Am I in a relationship where my joy needs permission? If you have to hesitate, edit, or shrink yourself just to keep the peace, then the cost you are paying is too high. Joy is not something to hide. Success is not something to be ashamed of. And you do not owe anyone a life lived below your potential. You may not need to cut the relationship off immediately, but you do need to reset boundaries. Not through harsh words, but through a clear, conscious choice. Choosing to share your joy with people who can truly be happy for you. People who, when you step up, do not feel left behind, but feel inspired. Because in the end, the most important question is not, are they there for me when I struggle, but can they stay with me when I am happy? If the answer is no, that is not your failure. It is simply a sign that you have outgrown that relationship. And you do not need to apologize for that. Sign 8. Coldness and being out of sync. After all the signs you have gone through, a very different state can appear. It is not loud, not tense, not confrontational. It arrives so quietly that, if you are not attentive enough, you will blame yourself before you ever question the relationship. This is when the other person is still there, still shows up, still replies to messages, still sits across from you, but somehow, you no longer feel that they are truly with you. And that is when the relationship is reduced to form alone. It is not that they abandon you. It is that they are present out of sync. You tell a story that makes you sad, and they respond in a way that is perfectly reasonable, perfectly appropriate. Nothing they say is wrong, yet you do not feel comforted. You share something that moves you deeply. They listen, nod, but their eyes seem to be somewhere else. You realize you are speaking, but you do not feel touched in return. As if you and they are occupying the same space, but existing on completely different emotional levels. The hardest part of this state is that you cannot name it right away. You cannot say the other person is uncaring. You also cannot accuse them of being cold, because they are not doing anything wrong. They are simply no longer in sync with you, and that misalignment, over time, exhausts you more than any clear conflict ever could. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. When you begin to hold back the things that matter to you because you no longer trust that the other person is truly listening, loneliness appears, even while the relationship still exists in full outward form. You stop telling the whole story. You filter your emotions. You shorten your words, not because you have less to say, but because you no longer feel safe opening up. Some relationships enter this phase very quietly. No arguments, no fights, no dramatic events. Just one person, slowly withdrawing from emotional connection. Not because they hate you, but because they no longer have the energy or the honesty to remain in that bond. And instead of leaving, they choose to stay and play the role properly, to be present out of obligation. They come because they should. They ask because they should. They stay because it's always been this way. But real emotion no longer accompanies action. You begin to sense it through very small details, slower responses, eyes that avoid yours when you speak about something important, hugs without strength, meetings that end earlier than usual. No one says anything, but both of you feel a growing emptiness. I once heard someone share that what made them decide to end a relationship was not a major incident, but the feeling of having to try just to make it enough. Trying to keep the conversation going. Trying to create warmth. Trying not to let things become awkward. And at some point, they realized they were carrying the entire living part of the relationship alone. Carl Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking." When emotional connection withdraws, what remains is often just habit, roles, or subtle power dynamics. Who needs whom more? Who holds on harder? Who is more afraid of losing the relationship? And that imbalance is what allows the relationship to continue existing, but no longer nourish either person. Being out of sync is also clearly revealed through body language. Words can be controlled, but the body cannot. A smile that does not reach the eyes. A glance that slips away while you are sharing something important. A quick, superficial touch, as if to fulfill an obligation. You do not need to study psychology to recognize this. Your body already knows. It feels cold, It tightens. It loses the ease it once had around someone who used to be very close. What hurts you is not that they do nothing for you, but that you are no longer received. You tell stories, but do not feel anyone opening themselves to listen. You share emotions, but do not feel anyone holding them. Gradually, you speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel safe saying it. And that is when the relationship begins to exist by form alone, no longer by connection. Carl Jung once wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good." When a person does not face their true feelings, fatigue, boredom, envy, or simply change, those feelings do not disappear. They only transform into another state: coldness, distance, presence without connection. And the person across from them is the first to sense it, even if no one ever puts it into words. You may have asked yourself, am I asking for too much? Am I too sensitive? Is this just a phase? But if the emptiness appears consistently, if you leave meetings feeling more drained than nourished, then it is no longer temporary. It is a signal that the relationship is existing by inertia, not by life. And sometimes, the most painful thing is not being abandoned, but staying in a relationship that has stopped flowing. You still talk, still stay in touch, still call each other by old names. But the sense of closeness is gone. In its place are caution, long silences, and a sadness that is very hard to explain. What is needed at this point is not blame, nor an attempt to reheat things through one-sided effort. It is honesty. Honesty with your own feelings. Honesty that you are no longer being seen, felt, or connected to. And honesty that not every long-lasting relationship is still the right one. Maturity sometimes is not about how many relationships you can keep, but about having the courage to leave relationships that have become only form. Not because anyone is bad, but because you understand that presence without emotion is, in the end, just a more subtle form of absence. And if you are in that state, remember this: you are not lonely because you ask for too much. You are lonely because you need real connection, something not everyone is still capable of giving. The bravest thing is not staying long enough, but recognizing when a relationship is no longer real, and letting go in silence, without resentment, without noise, only with inner clarity. You deserve relationships where your presence is welcomed, not merely tolerated. Every relationship has its quiet phases. But when coldness becomes the default, when presence is reduced to form alone, it is no longer connection. It is the postponement of an ending that arrived long ago. And when you are honest enough to see that, you do not lose a relationship. You simply reclaim yourself. We grow up with a very natural belief that the people closest to us will be the safest ones. That closeness means support, that if someone stays long enough, they must want us to be happy. But life gradually teaches us something different, not through major betrayals, but through very small details. A congratulation lacking emotion, a silence at the wrong moment, a strange feeling that appears after each conversation, when you leave feeling heavier than when you arrived. There are relationships that look perfectly fine from the outside. No arguments, no conflicts. No one does anything wrong. Yet inside, hostility hides within care. Envy is disguised as politeness, and hurt comes from those who never speak directly. You cannot name it immediately. You only know that you begin to be more guarded, share less, and gradually stop being yourself. Carl Jung once wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." Sometimes, the people who exhaust you the most are not necessarily bad people. They are simply unconscious mirrors, reflecting the boundaries you never dared to set, the expectations you placed in the wrong places, and the parts of you that have grown accustomed to enduring rather than being valued. What matters is not whether you manage to identify everyone who carries hidden hostility. What matters is whether you trust your own feelings, because intuition does not shout, it whispers. It appears as fatigue, hesitation, or a very quiet sentence in your mind. Here, I am no longer safe. Is in problems, and you do not need to expose anyone in order to leave. No intense confrontation, no need to decide who is right or wrong. Sometimes, maturity is simply withdrawing expectations and reserving your presence for those who make you feel lighter when you are with them. People who can be happy when you are happy, listen when you are tired, and do not require you to shrink yourself just to keep the peace. If, in the signs you have just gone through, you see parts of yourself, please remember this. You are not weak, and you are not alone. You are simply stepping out of an old layer of relationships, moving closer to a more aware, honest, and free version of yourself. And that is not a loss. It is a very quiet, but very real, step of growth. Thank you for walking with us to the end of this journey. If these reflections resonated with you, stay a little longer and listen to yourself more deeply. We will continue to have many deeper conversations about psychology, relationships, and the journey of understanding oneself through the lens of Carl Jung in the videos to come.